Hello, everybody. David Shuster here. America has just gotten another disturbing look at police brutality. And once again, a debate has erupted as to whether this is an institutional problem in law enforcement or the action of just a few sociopathic officers. I believe the answer is clear. We will get to that in a moment. But first, the background. New York's Attorney General recently released body camera footage from upstate New York showing officers beating an inmate named Robert Brooks. Brooks was already being restrained.
Newly released shocking video shows these correctional officers fatally beating an inmate, Robert Brooks. The footage, blurred and redacted by state authorities, shows officers repeatedly kicking and punching Brooks in the legs and chest and trying to jam an object down his throat. New York's Attorney General says Brooks was pronounced dead December 10th, a day after these interactions with correctional officers was recorded.
I do not take lightly the release of this video.
James says the video doesn't have audio because the officers involved failed to properly activate their body cameras. It begins with Brooks being carried inside, handcuffed, and face down. He's then raised up, face bloodied, and punched in various parts of his body. Brooks was serving a 12-year sentence for stabbing his girlfriend. His attorney says his death is incomprehensible.
I was there with Mr. Brooks' son and his father and his brother. They all watched the video as well. And I think it was just the overwhelming shock. It was just felt so incomprehensible.
On a human level, of course, but for everybody who's been reporting on police brutality, this kind of savagery by law enforcement is not unusual. Every few weeks, somewhere in the United States, there are law enforcement officers who throw away or disregard the Constitution they swore to uphold and take matters into their own hands. Instead of letting a judge and a jury mete out punishment to somebody who allegedly broke the law or is not complying with officers now, the cops deliver the punishment themselves, and it's often fatal. Along the way, officers will turn off body cameras or mute the audio in an effort to avoid getting caught. In other words, the cops often show consciousness of guilt. They know that what they are doing is wrong, but they do it anyway. And in this case, from upstate New York, it wasn't just the officers who tampered with their body cameras while beating Robert Brooks. There were other officers and staff who did absolutely nothing to intervene and stop the brutality.
You can see officers choking, punching, and kicking 43-year-old Robert Brooks in the face, torso, and genitals on December 9th, as two sergeants and a nurse simply watch and never intervene, according to a deposition by an investigator.
As Attorney General, you have my word that we will use every possible tool available to us to investigate this death thoroughly and swiftly.
It happened at the Marcy Correctional Facility in Utica, about 50 miles east of Syracuse. Brooks was pronounced dead the next day at a nearby hospital. A preliminary autopsy ruling Brooks' death a homicide caused by asphyxia due to neck compression. New York Governor Kathy Hochul ordering the termination of 14 prison staffers, including bystanders.
The governor and the state attorney general, Letitia James, are doing and saying all the right things. This was a shocking and disturbing incident. And everybody associated with it, the officers, the staff, and the nurses, should get fired.
We are investigating this case thoroughly and using every tool at our disposal to ensure that there is transparency and accountability for the events that preceded Mr. Brooks's death. I also want to make clear that this video and the conduct of these officers should not reflect poorly on the work and professionalism of the countless correction officers and correctional facility nurses throughout the state who go to work every day to protect and serve those in their care.
The Attorney General is correct on that last point. It wasn't every corrections or law enforcement officer in New York who participated in this fatal beating. It was just 14. And while the AG can hope this won't reflect badly on all law enforcement, the fact is that it does reflect badly on all law enforcement. The image and reputation of law enforcement, police officers, and correction staff takes a huge nosedive whenever these incidents happen. And again, these unnecessary deaths keep happening across the United States over and over again. And even in cases when people do not die, when people are simply injured physically or emotionally, there are endless examples of police trampling on the Constitution and disregarding basic legal rights. Even if you confine this to corrections officers in upstate New York, we did a video a few months ago showing staff outside one prison disregarding basic constitutional rights of the press. The officers seem to have no idea that a citizen with a camera is entitled to stand on the public sidewalk and take pictures of the outside of a prison. And when you have officers who don't know First Amendment basics, you can bet those officers don't know much about the use of force or the limits and expectations put on law enforcement by the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution and by the courts. The fact is, there are law enforcement officers in every state who trample on basic constitutional rights and become easily triggered if somebody shows the cop even the slightest disrespect. Never mind that all Americans have a right to say whatever they want or to stay silent, not answer questions, and yet hear from an officer as to why the cop is arresting or stopping them. And in nearly every state, a police officer must have reasonable, articulable suspicion that a crime has been committed, is being committed, or is about to be committed. And in order to use force, the courts have ruled that police must be faced with imminent physical danger to themselves, to bystanders, or believe that the defendant will harm themselves. Unfortunately, especially when a defendant or suspect is black or Latino and the officer is white, the expectations and standards tend to go out the window. And when the defendant is a convicted criminal who is already behind bars, well, some officers think it's okay to stuff objects in the defendant's mouth and beat the hell out of that person for alleged non-compliance. And more often than not, the beatings involve officers who are white and suspects or defendants who are black or Latino. The fact is, institutional racism exists in our society, and there are institutional problems across law enforcement. Police are trained to show that they have the power and that everybody else must submit to them, instead of being trained on how to de-escalate or coax compliance through peaceful means. And until the fundamentals of law enforcement culture truly change, not just in some departments, but in all of them, the senseless and abhorrent beatings and deaths will continue. American law enforcement has made some progress, and police body cameras are helping, but there is still more work to be done, and everybody in law enforcement and the U.S. justice system knows it. By the way, if you want to see the video I mentioned involving New York corrections officers and a citizen journalist, check out the link below.
We have constitutional rights in this country.
Well, if you're video recording, which you're not allowed to do.
I am allowed to. By who? Who says I'm not allowed to?
Right. New York State Department of Corrections says you cannot see.
You have no authority over me. I'm not an inmate, sir. I'm not inside those walls.
I'm David Shuster. Thanks for joining us.